Greta Marie's Diary, 22nd of 2378. Yesterday was certainly eventful, perhaps far too much. After Kieran, left in the evening, I served dinner to Lillian as usual, though she wasn't that hungry. In fact, she was far more in a mood to talk, and kept asking me what I thought of it all while endlessly talking to herself about it. She had immediately disliked the stranger and prided herself in instinctively knowing that he was a criminal of some sort. I had to bite my tongue not to reply to her nonsense, as she kept going. To me, at least, it was very clear that in actuality the entire situation had rattled her because of her jealousy over Kieran. Well, Vivi. I have been debating whether I should tell Lillian the truth to spare her the heartbreak that she will undoubtedly face soon. This attachment of hers has become too serious, and while Vivi can keep insisting that she only comes here for the research and at the Duke's bidding, I can see through her as well. It is a shame that their mutual interests could never lead anywhere. Not only because of Lillian's situation with the inheritance, but also I suspect, especially after mine and Vivi's trip, that Vivi will not be staying here in Illyria. By this point, she has been here long enough that I do think that she likes it here, at least a bit, and she certainly has found people to be with. But in the long run, she misses her family and home and true vocation too much. Unless Illyria were to remain forever cursed and in need of aid, I doubt that Vivi will remain with us here. Now, getting access to ships in order to leave might prove a difficulty for her, especially as the two people who have ships to go to Arinon and further are fond of her, and likely not in the mind of letting her go. I have been trying to find information about the criminal myself, by asking other staff members and Malbot. As I was hired five years ago, I do not know of any big arrests or scandals or robberies prior to that. Us Green Gardeners stay within our tight-knit groups prior to leaving on missions, and before me getting my position here, none of us knew much about Illyrian society overall. Perhaps we should have ingrained ourselves earlier. Perhaps that would have aided in our quest to salvage Illyria, but it is too late to lament our ways now. Ideally, once the moon is saved, we'll be able to reveal ourselves and make some sort of deal with the Duke and other society here. After all, we descend from the original inhabitants of Illyria, not them. Though by now we resemble humans far more than the original goblin-like creatures that lived here over 600 years ago. A few of the older servants did recall some gossip about a bunch of criminals who got caught, perhaps 7 years ago. They thought that they might have been all a family, though they weren't certain. Whether with this group was one tall man they could not possibly recall, though that is likely. Of course, there was the possibility that there were many groups of different types of criminals, and this one could have belonged to any of them. Apparently, despite the Dibau family having hidden it rather well, there has always been quite frequent criminals in Illyria, both people from here and other pirates and such who have landed here every once a while. I wonder if Vivi has realized how lucky she was in altering her story from crash landing to an intentional landing with neutral scientific purposes. Otherwise, she might have been assumed to be a pirate, though to me she does appear a very unpirate-like person. As for Malbot and its records, it was useless. Perhaps our prank has worked too well, as the old robot is now near unintelligible. The two sirs actually found me while I was trying to interrogate it, and I had to deal with them and the dumb robot. Both their egos had been hurt in yesterday's dealings, as well as Sir Andreas's stomach and one arm which was now held in a wrap against his chest. Due to this, they were extra grumpy and annoying when talking to me, and I had to do my very best not to lose my temper around them. We ended up locking away the Malbot in one of the sheds in the gardens, and its ravings were only partly silenced by the wooden door to the shed. After all of that, I had been hoping for at least a small break, when the bell to the front gates rang. I already started heading that way, and I passed by Lillian, who had been in her painting room. I had suggested earlier that she deal with her heightened emotions by doing this for a while, and my suggestion appears to have been too good. I found her disheveled with her expensive gown covered in splashes of paint. But at least she appeared brighter and happier than I had seen her in ages. I quickly asked her whether I should admit inside whoever was at the door, and she shook her head, turning back to her pictures. As I was leaving, she quickly called out, "Unless that person happens to be someone of deep importance." I of course knew who she meant by this, and had to force my eyes not to roll around. Another servant had already answered the door, a young girl who had joined the Countess's service only a few months ago. Her eyes were wide as she turned to me, informing me that the servant Kieran was at the door, and he was dressed very oddly. I gently pushed the girl out of the way and had a look myself. She hadn't lied, it was indeed Vivi. The camera at the door made her look taller and stronger, and she had ditched her usual palace servant suit. Instead, she was wearing a white, relatively clean suit, although it did look like it had recently received some blows. It was hard to tell through the lens, but I made out the logo of the Tennis Corporation on her chest. She was shifting from one foot to another, looking up at the camera with her brown eyes. She called out confusedly, "Hello?" Her voice muffled and deepened in the video feed due to her thicker helmet, which clearly hadn't been a part of her original uniform. Why had she decided to start wearing her old clothing instead of the Duke's? I feared what Lillian would assume of this, but did not want to go against her wishes. Thus, I bid the servant girl to allow Vivi inside, and I went to meet her by the gate. To my great disappointment, the two sirs who were becoming the bane of my existence had arrived before me, and were glaring at Vivi. Strangely, she appeared to be ignoring them, instead looking around the house as though she'd never been here before. Sir Andreas appeared to be on the verge of challenging Vivi again when I arrived, and gave both him and Sir Tobias an angry look. They backed down a bit, although they stayed while I greeted Vivi and asked her why she'd arrived so suddenly. She turned to look at me, stating that she wished to meet with the Countess, if that was possible. Her voice sounded raspier than it usually did, and her hair appeared to have been cut at least 2 or 3 inches shorter. I wondered if she'd had a long and restless night, given her appearance. Had she left the Duke's service, or been kicked out? I informed her that Lillian would indeed be glad to meet with her, though she would need at least 5 or 10 minutes to get prepared. Vivi told me that that was no issue, as she wasn't in a rush, which made me even more confused. As I walked her to one of the drawing rooms near Lillian's, Sir Andreas and Sir Tobias followed, whispering to one another. As they were there, I did not have the chance to talk to Vivi, though I heard footsteps behind me. The whispering of the two sirs was getting increasingly loud, and if even I could hear their slander of Vivi, calling him an upstart fresh youth, a foreigner with no rights to give visiting the Countess, and other rudenesses, then so could Vivi undoubtedly. Thus I wasn't that shocked when I heard her turn around and quite loudly inform the two gentlemen that she had not requested to meet with them and had no interest in their inane babblings. I was certain that a fight would break out once more, and I turned around dreading it, knowing this time I might need to step in to save Vivi. What I found instead was Vivi glaring at the two sirs with such ice in her stare that while the two were trying to meet it, I could tell that they were already losing. After clearing her throat in the form of a question, the sound echoing in the hallway, both Tobias and Andreas turned around, fleeing into whatever part of the estate they would haunt while Vivi stayed here. I gave her an impressed stare as she turned around, and she shrugged with a slight blush on her cheeks. She apologized to me for losing her temper a bit, but I told her not to worry about it at all. as those two absolutely deserved all of her ire and more. After leading her to the room where Lillian could meet her after getting ready, I asked Vivi quickly if she was doing well after yesterday's events. In answer, she simply stated, "What events?" and continued to look round the room impressed. I suppose that ignoring all of yesterday may have been a fine idea, especially as Lillian would not want to dwell on them. When I found her in her room, she had managed to dress herself halfway into one of her loveliest gowns. It was a lavender piece, with only some frills and lots of golden detailing. I helped her finish putting it on, and was as quick as I could in doing her hair as well. I have asked her several times to allow me to cut it, as it nearly reaches her waist, but she always refuses. It is lovely, but it also gives me so much work, and has me use time that I could be using for better purposes. After the hair was ready, Lillian dabbed on some perfume and light touches of rouge to her cheeks and lips. She gave me a smirk and stated, "The surprise visit from him can only mean one thing, Greta Marie." I wasn't so certain about this, but followed her out of the room. Upon seeing Lillian arrive, Vivi sprung up from the sofa she'd sat on and bowed, a thing I could not recall her doing since perhaps the first 2 times she'd visited. Lillian giggled in a pleased manner and came to meet Vivi, looking up at her. I don't think I'd realized how stark their height difference was until now, or perhaps Lillian had worn heels most of the days they'd met. As she had dressed herself, I didn't know which pair of shoes she'd chosen to match her dress. The two bantered for a bit, well, I suppose you could call it that. Lillian teased Vivi, Kieran for arriving unannounced, while Vivi apologized for her forwardness. Lillian, who was blushing, brushed this off and admired Vivi's new, or I suppose old, uniform. Vivi asked her whether she knew about the Tennis Corp, after which followed a short, awkward silence. To get over that odd statement, Lillian simply ignored it and asked Vivi whether she would like to go for a walk in the gardens, as they hadn't done so in a while. I walked behind them as they made their way, and Lillian boldly slipped her arm through Vivi's, who stiffened but then relaxed. Her behavior was going completely against what I'd warned her about doing. Was this some insane idea, to play into Lillian's hopes to then completely crush them? In my brief time of knowing Vivi, the true her, not the facade of Kieran that she puts up, she had not struck me as devious or cruel. And even as the two walked and talked, Vivi was acting warm, albeit maintaining some distance. Indeed, she didn't reference the previous day at all, and showed no signs of having been in a fight. She also did not mention the man who had saved her, which I can only imagine Lillian was glad of. When getting to the garden gates, I opened them to allow Lillian and Vivi in, but when I made to follow them, Lillian stopped me. "You can chaperone from here," she said lightly, before rejoining Vivi, who was looking around impressed. While it had been a while since she'd been here, it had not been so long, and the garden certainly hadn't changed that much. Despite this, Vivi appeared to be engrossed in Lillian's babbling about the garden, babblings which I could have sworn she'd heard before. I stayed behind, closing the doors even, but as soon as the two were at a far enough distance, I opened up a small panel in my arm. During my visit back home, I had reworked much of my cybernetic stuff and made a small control panel for everything in my arm. I had also attached some new parts to one of my ears. While it wasn't hurt or anything, the new parts acted as enhancements. Thus, I was able to increase my capacity to hear, so that I could catch most of Vivi's and Lillian's conversation. I was not surprised to hear that it was mostly Lillian speaking, as this was what usually happened during all of their dates. Vivi was naturally more quiet, and Lillian simply had so much to say. I suppose she didn't really have other people to speak so openly with, as even with me she kept a distance due to my position as being one of the many in her service. And while Vivi listened patiently, she also answered and gave her own thoughts, despite sometimes challenging Lillian's. Well, not at first. I think Lillian has learned to appreciate this. Today, however, She was barely speaking at all. Instead, she led Lillian around the gardens and allowed her to speak to her mind's end about their entire time together and their work in the Lovenot greenhouse and the spreading of the rod and the Duke's oddities. At some point, the two got so far away that even with my enhancements I could not hear them, and I tried to understand what was happening. How could Vivi have changed so much in one night, and how did Lillian not realize this? Greta Marie's diary. In the evening of the same day. Vivi stayed with Lillian for a few hours, the last of which I was unable to hear what they were discussing. When Vivi finally departed, however, Lillian was in an immensely happy mood. I walked behind them as Lillian walked Vivi to the gates to bid her good night. They still had their hands intertwined, and during the walk Lillian asked Vivi whether she was certain she did not wish to stay the night here. This raised my eyebrows significantly, as I suppose this confirmed that she must have left the Duke's service. Vivi declined, however, although she promised she would be back the following morning. Nothing could have made Lillian happier. I am certain, and thus unlike most times, she actually let Vivi leave without too much stalling. After, we walked to the dining room, where supper was to be served. Lillian was humming happily, and while her joy was infectious, it also made me very nervous about everything. Has Vivi lost her mind? During dinner, I tried to get her to admit to me what happened during all those hours in the garden, but Lillian remained vague about it all, simply describing it as lovely. Apparently, Vivi appeared slightly dazed at first, asking odd questions, but perhaps that was simply due to her change in situation. Apparently Lillian realized that gave away a lot and remained more quiet after that. I only realized afterwards that she was subtle during dinner as her uncle and his guest joined us soon after, having clearly been hiding behind the door. When Tobias opened his mouth, appearing to be on the verge of asking or accusing Lillian, she gave him a glare disguised in a smile. Thus, for the remainder of dinner, the two sirs simply whispered to one another, whilst Lillian ate hers in peace and quiet. When we got to her room, and I helped her get ready for bed, she finally admitted to me what Vivi had told her. Apparently, she wasn't working for the Duke anymore and was simply an agent of the Tennis Corporation. She had also told Lillian that she was passing by in Illyria, and would only stay should she find something worth staying for. While repeating these words especially, Lillian's cheeks and ears reddened, though she tried to look away from me. While she may have been certain that Vivi meant her, I do not think that likely. I asked her what else the two talked about. After all, they'd been together several hours. Lillian told me some things, though it seems that Lillian had mainly just been able to talk on about whatever she'd wanted to, as Vivi had been in a listening mood. As to my question about why Vivi would be returning tomorrow already, Lillian simply smiled and said, "You will see in the morrow, and do make sure to have my best dress ready for it." I dread to think about what that means and what she has planned. Once the lady was finally ready, I left her to her happy dreams and made my way towards the servants' area. I was unlucky to find myself ambushed by the two sirs, who had become milder since dinner, likely due to the drinks they'd had, though they still remained somewhat incensed by the afternoon. Rounding on me before I could escape, the two told me that it was time to see the effects of our prank on Malbod. To call it our prank is presumptuous in my opinion, as I have done most of the work. For minutes they stood and rambled at me, and I let my mind wander for a bit, simply trying not to lose my temper. Then I snapped and agreed that we could all go have a look at the robot. We made our way to the shed, where the robot was locked up. The two idiots kept on annoying commentary during our walk there, though I still had so much on my mind due to the events of the day that I was able to ignore them. When we finally arrived to where the robot was, I thought that it had died, well, as much as robots can die. It was standing in the small shed, completely unmoving, still dressed in yellow ribbons. If anything, the ribbons had increased since the last time I'd seen it. Where it was getting them from, I had my suspicions, as several of Lillian's yellow gowns had recently gone missing. I suppose it's a good thing that she finds yellow to wash her out and rarely wears it. When Sir Tobias went to poke the robot, rather rudely, in the center of its, well, what I would call its face, it did awaken, and began to sing some melancholy tune about being rejected in love. Given its robotic voice and sappy lyrics, the two sirs burst out laughing. They were both very pleased with how the prank had turned out and tried to get me to join in their celebrations. I wasn't in the mood, however, and waited until they were done with their hilarity. It felt like hours, although in truth it was likely only a few minutes. Seeing my, to them, disappointing reaction, the two took offense and left me alone. I have not felt so relieved in days. Malbot was still singing, although its volume was lower, and I walked up to examine it. Some time ago I had found where to open its back panel, despite the button being hidden under its uniform. I opened it and began tampering with the robot, until I got what I wanted. I managed to activate open mode and began to ask the Malbot questions. Somehow its voice still sounded dejected, as though it had suffered a genuine heartbreak, but it was answering all that I wanted. Previously, various questions simply yielded a classified information response, but now nothing appeared to be off limits, including William Olive's research. Malbot revealed that he had the key to hidden research, stored in the Lovenot greenhouse itself, beneath a floor panel. On its left arm, one of his fingers turned into a key, which I gently detached. After giving me the location of the floor panel, the robot quieted again, and I inserted my own arm and connected it to his control panel. I wiped all of the information within Malbot and reset the robot to its original factory form. Then I turned off its power. It would be up to Lillian to decide if she wanted to redo all the programming on Malbot. Frankly, I do not think she requires a robot butler, especially with all the other servants and maids. I took off from the room and towards Lillian's, the key heavy in my hand. During the walk, I steeled myself for what I had to do, as the only possible way to get into the greenhouse, or the only one that came to my mind, then, was to tell Lillian everything. Well, nearly everything. It was up to Vivi to reveal her own specific truths, especially with how much bigger of a mess she'd made earlier today. When I got to Lillian's door, I could already hear her soft snores from inside. Not only would she dislike being woken up, as she never liked that, she would be shocked and likely angry about everything I was going to tell her. I gave myself no time to back down, however, as I stepped inside and turned on the lights. Lillian yelped as she sprung up to sit, her sleeping mask still on. I apologized and shut the door, walking up to her and pulling up a chair so we could be on a more similar eye level. Before she could start complaining, I began to talk, and soon was unable to stop myself. I told her that from the beginning I had been someone else than I told her I was, that I was part of a group called the Green Gardeners who'd sent me to be here undercover with a true purpose to help heal Illyria. I explained about my snooping into Will's research and my trip a few days ago into an infested and abandoned scientific base. What surprised me was that she was mostly just shocked, not angry. What roused her ire instead was when I told her what me and the sirs had been doing to Malbot. While she did let me finish, with me explaining what had just occurred with the key in the secret compartment, once I was done, she began to rage at me. While she was hurt that I had lied to her, her biggest gripes were with me messing up the robot. She kept repeating, "I will need him in perfect shape for tomorrow," which made no sense to me, but I let that slide. I managed to get her to calm down, slowly until she understood what I was asking of her. To be let inside the Lovenot greenhouse. Lillian had begun walking around the room in circles, and she stared at me, trying to make a decision. I hoped this wouldn't take her as long as most decisions did, and I nearly cursed when a servant girl appeared in the doorway with a letter in hand. The girl was trembling slightly as she handed the paper to Lillian and then told us some shocking news. The Duke had sent out a request that everyone shelter in for the night, as an attack had broken out at the palace.